Good evening and welcome to Political Forum for Wednesday, October 19th, 2016. We're pleased to welcome as our special guest tonight State Representative Barbara Flynn Currie from the 25th District.
Thank you.
Welcome back to CAN TV.
Thank you very much.
Political Forum is a live, interactive call-in program designed to connect you directly with your elected officials. Over the next 25 minutes or so, we hope you'll have an opportunity to learn more about Representative Currie, her views on some of the most urgent challenges facing our city and our state. Above all, Political Forum is about you. We don't want to talk at you, we want to talk with you. So your views, your voice is an important part of the program. We invite you to join the conversation by calling in at 312-738-1060. The number at the bottom of your screen, that's 312-738-1060. Representative Currie, welcome back.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Well, as we meet tonight, we're just a few moments away from the third and final presidential debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump.
Yes, makes me very anxious.
Have you been watching all of the debates?
I have, and I think Hillary has just outdone herself. I think she's been spectacular, and I think Mr. Trump has missed the boat on many occasions, and I certainly hope that tonight he keeps missing that boat.
Now, you've been in politics for a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. I'm a veteran politician. We don't say old, we say veteran.
You're seasoned. Have you seen anything like this presidential election cycle?
Never, never, never. I think that Donald Trump is scary. I think his willingness to appeal to the worst among us, bigotry, anti-Mexican, anti-women, anti-African, anti-everything we stand for, his willingness to play upon fear. We have to build a wall because we want to keep those people out, and then he defines those people in ways that are totally inappropriate. Now he is spreading concerns that the election that hasn't even happened yet will be rigged. No sensible observer believes that, and it just strikes me that he's appealing to the lowest common denominator, and it makes me anxious about the future of my country.
Now, you're no stranger to CAN TV and Political Forum, but for our viewers tonight who might be meeting you for the first time, tell us a little bit about the 25th District.
25th District is on the mid-south side of the city. It's entirely along the lakefront, although it also goes as far west as, I believe, Ellis Avenue, not very far west, in Hyde Park. It covers parts of the communities of Kenwood, Hyde Park, a little bit of Woodlawn, a lot of South Shore, and a fair piece of South Chicago. It's a diverse district, racially, ethnically, in terms of income levels, it's diverse as well. But the things that tie the district together are a concern about making sure that our kids have a good education, that they have a chance at a quality schooling, and that people have an opportunity for jobs. There are other things as well, healthcare, affordable housing. Those are the things that animate the people that I serve. But that's true whether they come from the more or the less affluent areas, whether we're talking about the African American population or the Caucasian. Schools are a very, very big rallying cry, and so, as I say, are jobs.
You served the people of the 25th District since 1979, and
right.
What inspired you to get involved?
I said veteran.
I'm sorry, we didn't meet. You've been around the block once or twice. Okay. But how did you get involved in public life? What motivated you to pursue?
I came from a family that cared a lot about public policy. Our dinner table conversations were always about the big issues of the day. Probably not as much in the way of state political issues as national, but that's how I grew up, grooving on civics lessons that I heard round the dining table. My parents were both engaged politically, and I think I inherited it from them. I also found myself turning toward courses in political science, in sociology, when I was in school, both in high school and in college. I myself became active with the League of Women Voters. Representative, I had something of a record of working in and for the community.
Well, we mentioned Secretary Clinton a little bit earlier in the program, but you know something about breaking glass ceilings.
Yes.
You're the first female majority leader in state history.
That's right.
And this year, when voters in Cook County head to the polls and they look at their choices for president, U.S. Senate, state's attorney, We see strong women on the ballot.
We sure do.
Say a little bit about women in politics.
But we see Hillary Clinton, we see Tammy Duckworth, who is an amazing public servant, and we see Kim Fox. And my prediction is that certainly in Cook County, all three of those are going to be big winners. And it is exciting to see the first woman running for a major political party for the office of President of the United States. I can hardly wait to call her Madam President.
You mentioned winners. Let's talk about some of the losers, because I think it's been a very difficult time in state government. Seems like not much has gotten accomplished over the last year to 2 years.
Yes.
In your view, what's the biggest challenge facing state government, and what can be done to solve that challenge?
No question the biggest challenge is the state of our state finances. We do not have adequate revenues to meet the basic needs of fragile, vulnerable populations. We don't have the resources to do an adequate job and an equitable job of making sure that our students, our public school students, are fairly funded, whether they live in Harvey, Hazelcrest, Bunker Hill, the city of Chicago, or Rock Island. So that's a major challenge. When the so-called temporary income tax lapsed in January 2015, almost 2 years ago, it left a gaping hole in the budget, and there has been no effort on the part of the new governor to try to find a way to fill it. The new governor talks about a very different agenda, not a fiscally responsible agenda that he thinks will mean Illinois is now a great economic engine again. I would urge that Illinois still is an economic engine. Every day I pick up the newspaper and there is the mayor of the city of Chicago welcoming yet one more corporate headquarters to town. And I know that income levels for workers in the state of Illinois are a lot higher than they are in places like Indiana and Iowa. So I think we have a lot to recommend us. I think we have a lot of bragging rights that we're not adequately using. But I think that until we get our fiscal house in order, we're not going to be as popular, we're not going to be as much an attraction, an economic attraction, as we ought to be. So I would urge the governor to stick to his knitting, stick to what's going on at the state level, think about what the state's responsibilities are to, as I say, elderly people who are trying to manage at home and need a little bit of support to do that. Victims of domestic violence, are there shelter spaces for them? There are many, many groups, fragile groups, that do need help, and it seems to me time for the governor to understand that if you win the office of governor, you're supposed to govern.
This is Political Forum, a live interactive call-in program. Our special guest tonight is State Representative Barbara Flynn Currie from Illinois' 25th District. We invite your calls and your questions for Representative Currie. Please join the conversation at 312-738-1060. The number at the bottom of your screen, that's 312-738-1060. And Representative Currie, you mentioned the fiscal challenges facing Illinois, and that's kind of agenda item number one, is to tackle those challenges. Talk about revenue and how do we secure the revenue needed to support state services. Do you support a switch from a flat to a progressive income tax?
I do. In fact, among the states that tax income, Illinois is one of a handful that does not have a tax that is graduated with respect to rates. A graduated tax, a progressive tax, would make sure that people who have more pay a little more than people who have a lot less. So as I say, among the states that tax income, Illinois, first of all, is just about at the bottom of the pack in terms of the monies we bring in, the rates that we set. But we're also one of the few states that tax income that do not do so in a graduated progressive way. I'm a strong supporter of a graduated income tax. We have not yet been able in the legislature to develop enough support internally to put that question on the ballot. It would require a constitutional amendment, and it does require an extraordinary majority vote in both the House and the Senate to give the voters the opportunity to say yes or no. I'm strongly in favor of making sure the voters have that opportunity.
You mentioned where Illinois stacks up against other states, and another issue where we fall way behind is on school funding.
Yes.
I know you're on the School Funding Reform Commission. I understand you had a meeting today, or not too long ago.
Oh, this very day. Yeah, the governor, to his credit, created a School Funding Reform Commission. He asked his Secretary of Education, Dr. Beth Purvis to head up the group, and she's doing a good job. I think there are 25 commissioners. The legislative leaders appoint members, so does the governor himself, and the meetings that we have are always filled to the gills with the stakeholders, with the people who represent teachers, parents, the school administrators, the principals, academics who are just interested in what we would be doing there. So I'm hopeful that we will come to some conclusions, some consensus that means that we can stop being about the bottom of the pack in terms of state funding for public education. What it means to me is very important. If the state isn't doing the job, if the state isn't up to the task of paying for public schools, it's the local property taxpayer who picks up the slack. And unfortunately, property values are not the same in every part of the state. There are very poor suburbs in this part of the world. There are very poor communities in rural parts of Illinois. And even when those taxpayers agree to tax themselves to the hilt, it doesn't bring in enough money to provide their youngsters with a quality, adequate education. So finding a way to fix the inequity while also making sure that the dollars are adequate, that is the task of this commission. I think we need additional revenues in order to get the job done. So does Dr. Purvis. And the governor has admitted that even to run state government, he too needs additional revenue.
This is Political Forum, a live call-in program. Our guest tonight is State Representative Barbara Flynn Currie. We invite your questions and comments for Representative Currie. Please join the conversation. The number's right at the bottom of your screen, 312-738-1060. I think we have a caller on the line. Caller, are you there?
Hello.
Good evening.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for taking my call. My question for the representative is this. I was reading the Tribune earlier today, and I saw that all of the emissions test sites have been taken out of the city of Chicago, and the closest one is going to be in Skokie or something like that.
Whoa.
That is just far too far for a lot of Chicagoans like myself that have to drive. I understand it was a fiscal decision. I just want to know what she can do or is preparing to do to try to get an emission site back in the city.
Okay, I wasn't even aware of that, and I will certainly look into it. I live in the city too, and I sure don't want to have to drive as far as Skokie to have my emissions test. There have been emissions testing sites in the city of Chicago. I know I used to go out to one on Racine Avenue on the south side, and lately I've also gone to one north. But let me check into that. If there's anything that I can do to fix the problem, I will.
So the first call was IDOT related and emissions testing. We go back one step to the school funding formula in Illinois and what does an equitable solution look like. A lot of people who feel like the solution is not simply taking the existing pie and slicing it up differently.
Right.
It's growing the pie so everyone gets a bigger slice. And how much of that, do you agree with that assessment, and how much of that is part of your conversations with the School Reform Commission?
I absolutely agree with that, and I've been chairing a committee of the House, a bipartisan task force. We've heard from people all over the state. And here's the hard part about saying, well, we're just going to divide the money up differently, which I understand from an equity point of view, it certainly makes some sense. But we hear from superintendents who say things like this, well, 30% of the kids in our classrooms are low-income kids. That wasn't true 15 years ago, but it is true today. And if I'm going to lose $5 million under this new funding formula, I don't know how I'm going to meet the needs of those youngsters. And to me, that is a real issue, a legitimate complaint. So I think it's very important that we find new resources so that we can continue helping that district meet the challenges that its children bring into the classroom, at the same time making sure that the districts that right now are absolutely at the bottom are giving a significant boost up.
I think we have another caller on the line. Good evening, caller. Are you there?
Hi, Representative. I'm calling because I believe it was late last year or maybe it was earlier this year. You proposed a bill that would use some of the TIF surplus to go to the Chicago Public Schools.
Right.
And last I knew it, and when I read about it, it didn't get a lot of traction. And then now I see the new proposal for the budget by the mayor. and I see something very similar. Why do you think the bill that you proposed didn't get as much traction, and now it's being presented again on the new proposal?
Well, in fact, it's quite different. What the mayor is doing is saying, well, we got some extra money lying around, I'll give it to the schools. So he has total discretion over how much he calls that money and how he chooses to spend it. My bill would have redefined what can be used for TIF purposes. So it would have narrowed the definition, it would have tightened the definition, and it did create some pushback from aldermen who like very much to be able to spend TIF dollars in their wards, and maybe they didn't like the idea that there would be tighter controls. The mayor may have felt the same way. I did have significant support from a lot of the Chicago legislators, but not much from legislators from other parts of the state. I still think we need to tighten, to reform the TIF process so that all of us know that any TIF money going into a ward, a community, a neighborhood is there for really good reason, really to support a public purpose project, not just to line the pockets of the developer.
And to piggyback on the caller's question around TIF dollars, and to go back to your view about the biggest challenge facing the state, which is our fiscal situation, a lot of people feel like we can't really make progress on the fiscal front without addressing pensions.
Right.
What are your views about the pension situation and how we make that less of a burden for the state?
Right. Well, in fact, you're right, of course. The problem is that we have significant legacy costs. During the last 40 years, the state of Illinois didn't step up to the plate and keep current with its pension payments, and that was true through Republican governors as well as Democratic. Jim Thompson was governor when I started out. We never put a penny into the unfunded liability during his, I don't know if it was a 24-year tenure, and that continued to be true with future governors, again, of both political parties. The problem is that we now have a very significant bill, and someday it's going to come due. Used to be you just paid current costs. Well, that was not the right way to run this railroad, and you're right, this poses a significant fiscal problem. The legislature did try 2 years ago to find a way to limit the cost of the pensions that are already out there, and the Illinois Supreme Court rapped us very strongly on the knuckles and said you can't do that. Now, we did, starting in 2011, new hires for the state will be looking at a very different retirement program. So starting in 2011, anybody new to the job in Illinois state government is looking at a very different program, one that is not going to be nearly so costly to the taxpayers. But unless we find a way to encourage the state workers to agree to some reforms, it's hard for me to see a way around the Illinois Supreme Court ruling. So we may just have to keep biting the bullet and figuring out how we can spread those payments over time so that it is not a complete killer for us today or for our children and grandchildren down the road.
This is Political Forum, a live interactive public affairs program. Our guest tonight is State Representative Barbara Flynn Currie. We invite your questions and comments for Representative Currie. Please join the conversation at 312-738-1060. That's 312-738-1060. And Representative Currie, you mentioned the Illinois Supreme Court, and I've spent the past few months advocating for a potential change to our state constitution that won't appear on the ballot in November. But one item that will appear on our ballot is the proposed, quote-unquote, lockbox amendment. And I think you penned a piece encouraging people to vote no on the lockbox. What is that issue about, and why did you discourage people from voting yes?
So the idea is to enshrine in the Illinois state constitution language that says that any money in the road fund can only be spent on roads, bridges, highways, what have you. I certainly agree that our infrastructure, not just roads and highways, but all of our infrastructure is in very significant need of help. And I don't think it's a great idea for lawmakers to spend road money on other projects. But sometimes there is a crisis, sometimes there is some disaster, and we don't have a choice. Now, I would remind the callers that in the old days, before the 1970 Constitution, our Constitution was so specific about what local governments could do. They could only raise X amount of money, they could only spend $2.50 here or $4.25 there. guess what? We had a zillion local units of government. In fact, Illinois has more, I think, than any other, except maybe Pennsylvania or Texas. That was entirely because the Constitution tied legislative hands, tied the hands of the governor, said, you can't spend this, you can't do that, and the consequences are not pretty. Now, I do, as I say, think the legislature should tend to the infrastructure needs of the state, but I don't think that we want to say that roads are our highest priority, that they're more important than what happens in our children's classrooms, than what happens to the mentally ill, and so forth. What's the value in having a new road to a school when the school burns down and we don't have the resources to rebuild it? Additionally, those states that have this kind of lockbox for transportation, generally there's an escape valve. If a significant number of lawmakers and the governor agree to divert funds because there is some crisis, because there is some kind of disaster, whether a typhoon, a hurricane, flooding, what have you, then they're able to do that. There is no escape hatch in the proposed Illinois constitutional amendment. So I don't think that it makes sense for us as a people to say roads are our highest priority. School children, just take a hike.
Yeah, I think we have time for one or two more calls. Do we have a caller on the line?
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
Hello.
So the presidential debate is tonight. We're less than 3 weeks from the election. And quite honestly, I don't know if I can watch the debate tonight just because of all the rancor that's going on. And it seems like all the politicians are being painted in a poor light. And so my question for you, Representative, is this election, is it making these people who are elected officials, either from, on the whatever level of government, is it changing the way people look at them, that maybe everyone is corrupt, especially when you're looking at the younger voters who are voting for the very first time? So is this presidential election changing the way that people look at elections and look at elected officials?
I hope not, but I told you early, I am fearful that this new kind of discourse is one that is going to have long-term consequences for the faith of the American people in government, let alone politicians. Do you think government works? I think increasingly public opinion polls are telling us that people don't think government is working in a free, fair, open-handed manner, and that to me is very disturbing, very discouraging.
I think we have another caller on the line. Caller, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yep.
Yes. Well, the purpose of my call is in reference to these cameras that you have in Washington Park on 55th Street there.
Uh-oh.
Are we talking red light cameras?
No, speed limit cameras. They have one
okay.
at 55th Street there. And I received, about 4 tickets in that area. They go from 30 miles an hour to 20 miles an hour, and then they try to utilize and say, well, you're driving in a park area, and then you're close to a school. So my question is this. Each ticket is $100 that I received. So I've spent, since I've been back in Chicago, about $1,500 with a lot of these different lights and different zones. Not so much on the red light cameras, but it seems to be the speed zone cameras. Now, what I did, I got on the computer and I researched that light. That one light in Washington Park last year when I researched it was over $3.4 million, just that one light alone. So probably now this year is probably over $4 million. So my question is, I don't know why the people in the city of Chicago put up with this type of thing, why we're being overcharged. Maybe a $50 ticket would be more conducive. But first of all, let me just interject this. If they're going to ticket us and those funds, there needs to be a checks and balance where that money goes.
Caller, we're about out of time,
Okay.
but you want to try and
Well,
last call quickly?
it sounds like a pretty appalling system. And if I were you, I would be sharing the information that you're getting with your alderman and with the mayor's office, because it sounds to me as if somebody has figured out that there is this light in Washington Park, and that's what we used to describe when I was a kid as a speed trap, right? They've set up something where they know they're going to catch a lot of people and they're going to be able to charge them an arm and a leg. And that is not fair, and that was not the point of the speed cameras. So let the alderman, let the mayor's office know that you're onto their game and you don't like it.
We're about out of time. In order for our democracy to thrive, we need an informed and engaged citizenry. So we'd like to thank you for tuning in. We'd like to thank you for calling in. and we'd like to invite you next week, Wednesday at 7 o'clock, for the next edition of Political Forum. Representative Currie, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. This has been great.
And go Cubs!
Go Cubs! And could